I don't know exactly where any of you guys are at. All of you guys come with different stories, and I come with a different story. And just thinking about, the reality of what church is. There's broken people. It's made up of broken people. And I wonder how many of us come into youth group, thinking that you see around the room and you see people that look like they have it all together. Maybe you come in and you think, well, they've got the perfect family. They're an all-star athlete. They're popular. They come from a rich family. And maybe you walked in today and that's what you see. That's what you walked in looking at, and maybe you know people from school, and you know their fakeness. You know people from church, you know their fakeness, and you just see the veneer. You see all this stuff that's really not there. It's just what you perceive of a person. And it's not necessarily what is true, it's just what you believe to be true. And we're all here today, and we all have these stories that are different from each other, they differ from each other. And maybe some of you, you're going through life right now, and life is good. Life is great. You have nothing to complain about. Everything in life is landing right where it should be. Life at home is great. Life with a family is great. Life with relatives and all that stuff is going good. But maybe, just maybe, it's not even right now that you're concerned about. It's about stuff that you've actually experienced in the past. And it's baggage that you're still carrying around. It's this baggage that you're still thinking about, and it brings you down. It brings you down to these points where it's a rock bottom. You can't go any lower. All you can do is just sink right where you're at and just think about everything that's gone wrong. And maybe that's where you're at. And for some other, maybe this video was a little bit fresh. You know exactly where it's at. Maybe your parents aren't going through that divorce, but maybe you're going through some really hardships with your friends, with your family, in other ways. And you find yourself broken, vulnerable, and depressed. And as we think about depression, it's something that really prevents us from moving forward. Even with all the good things that you have in life. Maybe you have like a really good family. Maybe you actually do have money, so money's not something that you worry about. Maybe all the things that I'm talking about are good. But there's just something that is breaking you right now. And you find yourself in that broken position. And you just can't think about all the good things that God has given you because of the way that things are right now. And the future just doesn't seem worth fighting for. My wife was sharing with me a post about a man that committed suicide in Brainerd. He was an older gentleman, and I used to work in Brainerd at a church there, so it's a little, it hurts a little bit to hear about this stuff, and two teenagers that committed suicide. And to be honest, yeah, it's because of what's going on in school. You guys think that nobody else has feelings, or maybe people think that you don't have feelings, and they just break you. You encounter that depression because people are breaking who you are. Has anybody in the room ever felt depressed? Has anybody ever dealt with depression? Yeah, adults. That's really who deals with depression. Everybody, man, I wish I was a kid again, because teens don't deal with depression. But for me, it's good. Because I look around the room and I see that there are people who are broken and that are hurting. And maybe you just have this perception that everything is good. And as I raised my hand, it wasn't to try to make you guys feel comfortable. I struggle with depression. Really bad. And yesterday I actually struggled with depression, probably the worst that I've ever struggled with before. To the point where you just, you can't even see a bright future past today. And you might think, well, man, if life could just play out this way, I'm telling you, there is no perfect scenario where life will be bright. Because it hurts to walk this life. I work at a church, and there are still days that hurt. There are still days that are broken. It doesn't matter where you work. It doesn't matter what you do. You experience brokenness in this life because of the people that you interact with. They hurt you, and you hurt them. It's just a reality of where we're at. And sometimes it feels like life is not even worth fighting for. I'm just being honest. Sometimes it just feels like, is it really worth moving forward? And maybe it's not with life. Maybe it's not the idea of taking your life away because of depression. You just feel like, I don't even want to deal with work anymore. I don't want to deal with my relationships anymore. I can't see anything optimistic past today. There's nothing good that can come from the future. And you know what? There are people in the church that might even say, you shouldn't experience that. You shouldn't experience that because a Christian should be happy. Right? And they might even point to the Bible and say, well, doesn't it say in Nehemiah 8:10, don't be dejected and sad, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. Right? You should experience joy. That's something that you should experience every single day. So I must be sinning for feeling like a failure, for feeling depressed. And as I think about it, yes, the Bible does say that, but read it in context. And Nehemiah is taking out these scriptures, and Ezra is reading it to the people of Israel, and he's saying, you know what? This is what the Word of God says. And it says that when the people were hearing the words that Ezra was sharing, they started to cry, to mourn, and to weep, because something happened. All of a sudden, the Bible made sense. All of a sudden, it was like, it just felt so real that they just started to weep. And then they're told, stop weeping, stop crying, stop mourning. Why? Because you should experience joy, because the joy of the Lord is your strength. As he put it into this idea of what it is, you know what? I'm not saying that joy should not be part of it. In Galatians, one of the facets, one of the things of the fruit of the Spirit is actually joy, right? Joy, patience, kindness, forbearance, all these things that the Spirit produces in us. And joy is one of them. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't experience joy. But sometimes a church, sometimes pastors, sometimes people that are sharing the Word of God with you paint a different picture from what Jesus painted. Jesus, in the book of John 16:33, he says this, here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world. Jesus is not trying to paint a picture different than what we're experiencing here in life. He's saying, you know what, the reality of this, in this life, in this world, in this time, you're going to experience sorrows, you're going to experience all these things that are going to bring you down. And the reality of life is that there's going to be hard days. Days that, you know what, you're going to experience trials, persecution. You're going to experience sorrow, sadness, misery, grief. Why? Because it's part of the world we live in. It's part of the world we live in. Because we have a real life, we experience real pain. And maybe you're here today and that's not what you wanted to hear. You wanted to hear that life is, just going to be peachy. It's going to be great. And it's not. That's why Jesus says, take heart. You know what that means? It's to take courage, to take encouragement in the fact that he who is in us, that the God that we serve is greater than any circumstance that you could be going through. Why? Because he has gone through it and he has overcome it. It doesn't mean that life is going to be great. And, as you're going through life, you're going to experience trials, sorrow, persecution, rejection, and that's the things that Jesus experienced, and he overcame them. That's what that verse is saying. He experienced all this, and he overcame it. So take heart, because he has overcome the world. We're not promised a joyful life with great circumstances. We're just promised a life where God will come into us and walk with us in this life. We are told to take encouragement knowing that the one that we place our trust in is able to get us through this. We can take heart as we gain joy in our circumstances, and that's something that we have to choose. Because we're not promised a life full of joy, but a choice to take that courage. We have to make that choice. And you might say, well, then why do we need God? If I could just do this on my own, why would I need God in this process? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that tonight because we have to choose this change of mindset, this change of perspective, where we're not choosing to see everything negative with it. We're trying to see the positive of what God is trying to do in the midst of our lives. And that's what's hard. That's a mindset that's hard because when we're in the middle of it, we're not seeing anything positive. We're not seeing anything that's good. As I was dealing with this depression yesterday, and it was the worst that I've experienced yet. As I was dealing with this depression, it was so hard with anybody trying to cheer me up. It was a hard thing because all I'm thinking is, I'm not good enough. There is nothing that I'm doing that's good. God is not using me for anything. And I start to feel all these things that are just bringing me down. I don't need a change of perspective. I just want God to change everything in my life and change the way that things are going. And that's really what we want. But we have to choose a change of perspective. We have to choose something different. And at times we look at the Bible and we just think, well, it's telling us to take joy. It's not real. Because when I'm going through that stuff, when the Bible is just telling me to choose the opposite, who's ever encountered stuff like this? Okay, Jesus, but he was God himself. And as I look at the Bible, there's an account found in the book of Kings, and it's about a man named Elijah. And Elijah is one of those examples that's just great of godliness, of true godliness. Somebody that you could look to and say, man, that guy, if I could aim to be somebody godly and see what he saw, I would want to be that guy. But there are two men that are mentioned in the Bible that did not experience death and actually were taken to heaven. One of them was Enoch and the other one was Elijah. These two men did not die. They actually were taken to heaven, and it talks about it in the Bible. Now, if you're a skeptic about the Bible period, we could talk about that at another time if you have questions, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about this man that lived a life that was spectacular. A man that just looking at the things that God did, you think, how can somebody doubt when they experience that, right? If I could experience that, I would have no questions. My faith would be strong. And Elijah, before he's taken up to heaven, God uses him to do some incredible things. During his lifetime, the people of Israel had actually given into idolatry, which means that they had actually started worshiping two gods, Baal and Asherah. They had worshipped these two gods, and they had set up places to actually make sacrifices to Baal and to Asherah. As they're doing this, the Lord has turned against the people, and now Elijah goes to the king, King Ahab, and he tells him that it's not going to rain for the next few years. There's going to be no rain until Elijah says that it's going to rain. So there's no rain for 3 years. That's actually the period that it happens. And during that time, God provides for Elijah. You might think, okay, that's cool. No, it's the way that he provides for Elijah. So Elijah is told to go to this brook, and there's going to be water from this little ravine, this stream, and that's how he's going to get water, because remember, there's a drought. So there's water that's going to be flowing from there, and that's where he's going to get water. But God provides bread and meat for him as ravens bring it to him. It's pretty incredible, So God provides for him, and then after a time, that brook dries up. There's nothing more there. So he has to go, and he finds this widow and her son, and she's picking up sticks, wood, to make a fire. And at that point, Elijah goes to her and says, can you bring me something to drink and something to eat? And the lady says, you know what, I just have a little bit of flour left, a little bit of oil, and I was just going in to go and cook this last meal for my son and I, because we're just going to die. That's pretty much the outcome. And he says, you know what, just go and make some bread, bring me some, and whatever's left, you go ahead and have for you and your son. She does that, and for the time before the famine actually runs out, before God actually sends a rain, God continues to provide for the widow, her son, and Elijah. And there's always enough flour, there's always enough oil, and there's always enough to eat. There's always enough. So God continues to provide for him. So then, one day, her son dies, and she goes to Elijah and says, my son is dead. Why? Elijah goes and prays for him, and the son actually comes back to life. As I think about things that, how can you doubt God? This is it. If I could see somebody come back to life, if I could see God bring meat and bread from birds to feed me, if I could continue to see that the flour and the oil are constantly running out but never run out, man, how can you doubt God? That's something that we would consider a mountain peak high. That's something that we all want to experience. But then after the 3 years are over, Elijah goes and talks to King Ahab. He goes and talks to him about what's going to happen, and he throws out this challenge. Because the people of Israel are worshiping false gods. They're worshiping gods that are not God. And it says this. Elisha tells them, summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who are supported by Jezebel, Jezebel being the king's wife. So Ahab summoned all the people of Israel and the prophets to Mount Carmel. Then Elijah stood in front of them and said, how much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people were completely silent. They're not saying anything. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only prophet of the Lord who is left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Now bring 2 bulls. The prophets of Baal may choose whichever one they wish and cut into pieces and lay it on the wood of the altar. But without setting fire to it, I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood on the altar, but not set fire on it. So the challenge is they're going to do a sacrifice. They're going to do a bull sacrifice, and the goal is not to set fire on it. That's what the next scripture says. They call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the true God. So they're just doing sacrifices. And the one that responds and burns up the sacrifice is the true God. And all the people agreed. They said, okay, sounds fair enough. So Elijah throws this challenge out and says, okay, let's do this and let's settle this once and for all. If the Lord is God, then you're going to worship him. But if he's not, if he doesn't answer, then don't worship him. Worship Baal. But we're going to do this, and we're going to settle this once and for all. And the people agreed, so they get the sacrifices to burn. And Elijah lets the people, the prophets of Baal, go first. And it says that they prepared one of the bulls and placed it on the altar. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning until noontime, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no reply of any kind. Then they danced, hobbling around the altar they had made. About noontime, Elijah began mocking them. "You'll have to shout louder," he scoffed, "for surely he is God. Perhaps he is daydreaming or is relieving himself, or maybe he is away on a trip or is asleep and needs to be awakened." So they shouted even louder, and following their normal customs, they cut themselves with knives and swords until the blood gushed out. They raved all afternoon until the time of the evening sacrifice, but still there was no sound, no reply, no response. So they're doing all these crazy things. They're doing all these things that they do to try to appease to Baal. Baal try to start this fire. And there is no response, and Elijah's having fun with this. I mean, he's like, of course he's not going to respond. He's not a god. He doesn't exist. He has no power. And Elijah's egging them on. And then it says that Elijah begins to put the altar together. After there was no response, he begins to place the altar together. The altars were places where they would offer sacrifices once again. And the people of Israel had torn down the altar that was placed for the Lord. They had actually torn it down. There was no place to worship God. And Elisha begins to put it together. And after he puts it together, it says that he dug a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 3 gallons. Remember, there's a drought. Water's a luxury. He piled wood on the altar, cut the bull into pieces, and laid the pieces on the wood. Then he said, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour the water over the offering and the wood." After they had done this, he said, "Do the same thing again." And when they were finished, he said, "Now do it a 3rd time." So they did, as he had said. And the water ran around the altar and even filled the trench. He's making it even more impossible for himself. See, Elijah understands the God that he serves. Elijah understands that God is capable of burning up this sacrifice without any issue. And he's saying, just go ahead and keep on wetting it 3 times. And then the water starts to soak and create a little moat type thing. But then he cries out to God, and it says that immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. Guys, I don't know what's going to amaze you. I really don't. You're talking about God actually burning up this sacrifice, and there is nothing left. Everything is consumed, and the fire has completely dried everything up. Even the water that was all piled up. And when all the people saw this, when the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, "The Lord, he is God." Yes, the Lord is God. Guys, if you're a Christian, this is a huge moment. This is the kind of things that we would dream of for God to do, so people can see that we worship the one true God. That's what we're hoping to see, and it's a huge moment. After that, because the people acknowledged that he was God, they actually killed the prophets of Baal. Now you might say, that's just weird. No, it's great. Because that's what they were supposed to do. For anybody that worshiped anyone other than God. And Elijah prays, and rain falls again. King Ahab goes home, and he tells his wife Jezebel everything that happened. Because as husbands, as soon as we see something cool, we go tell our wives. But he goes and tells her everything. And Jezebel, his wife, gets upset at what just happened. And sends this message to Elijah. "May the God strike me and even kill me, if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them. Elijah just experienced something great, and he gets this note. And I want you to notice something. Because after this happened, Elijah says these words. Elijah is afraid. And it actually says that Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. That's what it says immediately afterwards. Do you catch that? He goes from seeing how God is working, how God is moving, how God is using him, how things are great, how God just turned the hearts of people towards him. And all he can focus on is that one statement. May the gods kill me if I don't have you killed by tomorrow. And he's paralyzed with fear and runs. Everything in Elijah's perspective changes. You know, maybe you've experienced this. When circumstances change in our life, when things aren't necessarily what we thought they were going to be, all of a sudden we forget all the good stuff that God has done. You know, you've seen maybe God work in your family, God provide, God be with you, God help you, and all of a sudden it's like all that is forgotten. That's in the past. All I can think about is what I'm going through right now. And Elijah goes from seeing everything and knowing what God can do, knowing his ability, to all of a sudden fearing the unknown. I have no idea what's going to happen. And maybe that's where we're at today. You know, I know that's where I was at yesterday. There was this moment where courage and joy just left me because of the fear of the unknown. I don't know. Courage and joy often leave us when we play out our fears for tomorrow. When all of a sudden we just don't know what's going to happen. When we just don't know what the possibilities of tomorrow might bring. And this is where Elijah finds himself. God has done great things. He has used him in great ways. And he's discouraged and afraid. Not only that, but he finds himself depressed. Are you looking for somebody in the Bible that you can actually just hear what he's saying and just be like, that's me. Hear this. This is the words of Elijah after this happens. He says, then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. So he's fleeing. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. He just wants to die. He wants it to be over. I have heard enough, or I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Do you catch what he's doing there? He's comparing himself. I'm no better. You know what? Just kill me now. Take me. This life is not worth living for. And he goes through this circumstance where it's just hard. It's hard to get through. And that's where we find ourselves during depression. It doesn't matter what God has done in the past. It doesn't matter how good things have been. It doesn't matter all the ways that God has worked in our lives to make our lives be what they are today. We can just see the circumstances that we're going through and just say, my life is falling apart. I am at the bottom of the pit, and I don't know how to go from here. This is it. It's easy to let one comment, one letter, one whatever, just tear you down. It's what happens. And if you've ever felt that way, you have to understand that when we get to these things, those circumstances overshadow anything good that God has done in our lives. We just can't remember it. And the way that happens is maybe you haven't experienced God in the way that Elijah has. Maybe you haven't seen him, consume a sacrifice. You haven't seen all these things. But here's the thing. Maybe you've seen God work at Big Sandy Camp. And that's where you're like, oh, you know what? Man, I remember when God did this. What is it doing now? Man, I remember life. And I'm not talking about life that we experience. I'm talking about life, the event with the CNMA. Man, that was the greatest experience in my life. What is it doing now? Whatever God did then, he can do now. You know what? And maybe you've experienced all these great things, all these highs, and you're thinking, if I could just relive that moment at Planet Wisdom, if I could just relive that moment at Big Sandy Camp, I would be strong again. You know what? God can meet you where you're at. God seems so far away during those times that it's just hard to handle another thing. You overestimate the size of your problem and underestimate the ability of God. And Elijah finds himself depressed. But God meets him where he's at. So the story wraps up as Elijah is broken, he's fearing, he's running, and then he actually goes to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai was where the people of Israel encountered God. And they encountered God in this place. And that's where Elijah's going back to. He's going back to the wilderness. And then it says that when he got there, the Lord said this to Elijah, "Go out and stand before me on the mountain." And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. And the wind after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire there was a sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak. He went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" See, at times when we're going through these circumstances where it's hard, something that happens is you start to see everything crumble. And you're looking at your circumstances. It might look like everything's falling apart. The wind is crashing in and your life is just caving in. But God isn't in any of those circumstances. Do you understand where Elijah hears God? It is in the gentle whisper. There's a gentle whisper. And then it says that the Lord asked him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" See, so many times we try to run away and we seclude ourselves because depression overtakes us, because everything that we're going through is overtaking us. You know what? We're going to experience hard times. Jesus said it. In this life, in this earth, you will have troubles, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. He's not promising you an easy life. He's not, if that's what you were thinking. But you begin to run from those issues. You begin to go somewhere where God is not calling you. And the question is, what are you doing there? Is that where God wants you? Secluding yourself, running away from your problems? And everything just keeps on crumbling. And you're looking at your circumstances saying, where is God in this? Where is God in this fire that is just erupting? Where is God as everything is crumbling over, as the rocks are falling? He's not there. He's in the whisper. He's in that voice that you're not even listening to because you keep on hearing every single voice in your life that is not God, and you just need to stop and listen. God is there. God will meet you there. Psalm 46 reminds us of this. God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the sea. Be still and know that I am God. Stop. When you hit rock bottom, stop, listen, and know that He is able. You have to look at what God has done in the past and know that He's able to take care of the present and the future. No matter how hard your circumstances are, God is able to walk you through them. No matter how lost you feel, God can bring you back. No matter how crazy life may seem, God is in the midst of it. And no matter how out of control your story feels, God knows the outcome. God knows how this story is going to end. Because there is nothing that you're going through that God is not in control of. You just have to be willing to stop and listen what it is that God is trying to teach you, what God is trying to show you, how God is trying to walk you through it. And the question is, what are you doing where you're at right now? Is God growing you? Are you seeking God in the midst of it? And if you're in the mess of it, understand that if you are there, listen and know that God, He can take your mess, take your pain, take your guilt, take your shame, hurt, past, present, trials, situations that you're going through, and He can use every single thing. If you're here tonight and you've never heard my story's a mess. My past is a mess. I don't have the best story to tell you. But I do know this, that God can take a mess and make something beautiful out of it. Not because it's perfect, but because in the mess of it, he still loved me and continued to move me through it. And you may feel tonight like you have no worth, and you have to stop listening to those voices. Yeah, and maybe it's people. Maybe it's people within this room. You have to stop listening to those voices. You're worth it. You're worth Jesus coming down, stepping into this world and dying for you. Maybe you're like Tad, and you're maybe facing that situation where your family's falling apart. Maybe it's something different. It still kills us, right? But at the same time, we know that we can experience joy through all of it. We have to pray that even in those circumstances, even those experiences, that God can meet us there, that God can work through them. Because we trust that our hope is not in our current circumstance or situation, but in our God who is able. And I want to finish with this, and if you've got a pen and you want to write this down, I encourage you, write this passage down. It's found in Romans 15:13, and it should be our prayer, because when we're going through hard things, this really should be our prayer. Paul writes this, I pray that God, the source of hope, will fill you completely with joy and peace because you trust in him. Then you will overflow with confident hope through the power of the Holy Spirit. See, there's this confident hope. There is this source of hope, which is God. So as we're going through these things, our source is not in my wife, it's not in my kids, it's not in the church, it's not in the people that I call friends, it's not in any of you. I'm sorry, you're not my source of hope. You're not my source of happiness. I respect some of you and I love you dearly, but you're not my source of happiness. Because if it is, I would be miserable. My source of hope is found in God alone, and he's the one that can fill me completely, because there's this void inside of me that's constantly looking for approval. And as a teenager, you're looking for all sorts of approval. You're looking for approval from your boyfriend, girlfriend, from your friends, from your teachers, from all these things that don't matter. My source of hope is in Christ alone, and he fills me completely with joy and peace. For when I'm going through those circumstances that don't have joy, that don't have peace, that don't have anything good out of them, I can draw these two things from my source of hope. Why? Because I trust in him. And then I could be overflowed with confidence that tomorrow is going to be okay. Because of my source of hope. If I have no source of hope, I have no way to stay on solid ground. Everything else will shake. You will hurt me. I will hurt you. Unintentionally. People in this room will hurt you. But our source can always be found in God alone.